Yeah, sorry.
All right, I'll call the meeting to order at 7:03. Can we have a roll call, please?
Dustin Allred,
Here?
Will Andreessen,
Here.
Andrew Fell, Lou Hopkins, Deborah McFarland,
Present.
Bill Rose,
Here.
Karen Sims, and Chen-Shi Yu.
Here.
All right, looks like we have a quorum. Any changes to the agenda?
There are none.
Okay, and we have no minutes to approve from our last meeting? Is that?
That's correct.
Okay. Communications, do we have any communication?
We
Any
do not.
Communications?
No communications.
So we have no continued public hearings, no old business, no new public hearings, no new business, which brings us to audience participation. We have no audience tonight, so we will skip over audience participation for now. If anyone shows up and wants to provide some feedback or comment on the discussion in our study session, we'll provide an opportunity at that point as well. Staff report?
No staff report.
Okay. That brings us to our study session for this evening.
Okay, so in your packets you have essentially some updated products for the place types, for the place type maps and annotations, the mobility map, and then this time, I think the first time you're seeing them are the development opportunities map and then some street cross sections. So we kind of just wanted to go through and see if we wanted to discuss anything for these final versions. I can, sorry, did you say something? Somebody? Okay, sorry. This mic is really hot tonight. That's good. Okay. Okay. So the place types, you'll see that one thing that the students did was they went through and they removed all of those sort of illustrations, which didn't really seem to be, I'd say, doing a whole lot to tell the story of what we're trying to tell. So they inserted other photos in there of places around town, mostly, that kind of illustrated the things that we were looking for. So, this example is for the mixed residential. And then they made final versions of sort of these prototype plan views that they were that they had put together for a few of these different place types, just based on some feedback that we had given them. So I'd be happy to discuss any of these as we go through. We can do it, yeah, if you have specific comments about specific ones or things you want to talk about.
Yeah, I think as we go would be better.
Yeah.
I can start.
And
I think we meant to do this, and it looks like it didn't get done. So at this point, it will be on you to
Yeah,
do.
I've got the Illustrator files, so
Okay.
I'm good to go.
Well, this is not on that. On the images for the different development types, I
Mhm.
think we talked about some of them are labeled, like on the mixed residential it says townhouses suburban pattern. I think that's good. I think some of these maybe need something that's a little bit more descriptive. So in some of these it's describing a development type, in others it's describing like a type of change that's occurred. So I think we should be consistent across these. So, townhouses suburban pattern is good. The one next to it could be, I don't know what that is, like a fourplex or something? Is it a quadplex?
It is, there's 7 units in
Oh,
that, I
okay.
think. So it's, yeah, you wouldn't know it from looking at it.
Yeah, so something that's a little bit more descriptive of the development type,
Okay.
maybe, as well as describing that it was this urban infill development. And then just something like that that's kind of consistent across the different development types. Like when you get to mixed use, there's the one that shows Hirachis, that could be an example of business, business development in the mixed use, I don't know, in secondary core or something like that, but
Oh, yeah, because it just says secondary core.
yeah. So that someone has a little bit more information about what they're looking at in terms of the development type, and not just the description of the place type, I guess. It's place type and development type, maybe, is what we're
Yeah,
going for, or would be.
yeah, okay.
Pardon me?
Place types and development types.
Two different things, I think, potentially. I mean, a townhome is a development type. The place type is mixed residential neighborhood.
Development type is what we might typically call a land use type, but we're focusing only on physical form when we talk about development type. What are we actually talking about? Anyway, we have to think that through.
So I think,
Form and use, I think.
yeah, I mean, I would think that the place type is sort of the neighborhood writ large, and then the development type is the sort of specific types of developments we would see within that place type.
Yeah, one thing,
Okay.
just to match, like, the description of the mixed residential neighborhood says that it can be detached housing, duplexes, townhouses, apartments. So the idea is that we're providing examples that are illustrative of what that looks like locally, right? So something that matches those descriptions with the labels, I think, would be useful. So that this is an example of an apartment, this is an example of a townhouse. So we've kind of got it. There's just a little
Yeah,
detail in some of these.
and not that I'm trying to make more work for myself, but just this conversation has me thinking that it might make sense to have some sort of a matrix of place types and then development types that you might see in that neighborhood. Not saying for certain you would see that type of thing, but then give examples of the development types and sort of put a little checkbox in the place type where that development type may be found.
And I think we need definitions if we're going to use those terms. What the difference
So that complicates this for me, because if so far we're looking at mixed residential. If we're going to describe these photos as development types, then we don't have any pictures of place types.
Well-
And that's one of my concerns about these photos under place types, is they don't actually show the mix.
Well, I think that's this.
Yeah, that's kind of,
this right here, and
Right,
this.
well, so maybe these photos belong in your matrix or something if they're really the development types. The first 4 photos are development types, not place types. The site plan and the oblique are place type descriptions.
Correct, yeah.
And that also means we need the rest of the development types in development types. As it's your matrix. but
Right.
If we're gonna do photos, we have to somehow coordinate the photos with that. And, well, I'll let this go and then come back to other questions later.
Mr. Rose, you had something?
Well, I concur with what I take as the gist here, namely that place types need a first presentation, and so the plan and the oblique would show the place, and it would be followed by development types. And it strikes me that these 4 photos of development types would benefit from having expanded captions to say type of unit we're talking about.
So that makes me realize something else as I'm scrolling through this. If these photos are of development types, and development types can be in more than one place type, then the development types shouldn't be under place types. Again, it goes back to your matrix. Your matrix conception is what we need, how we arrange the graphics. I don't know, but what we need is graphics of place types with their descriptions, which we've got, but get the development types out of the place types completely and put them in a section of development types and then reference them by your matrix.
I don't know. I think it's useful to be able to look at a place type and see, oh, these are the, illustrative development types that you would likely find, or we would want to find or see in these place types. And I don't know how much overlap there is.
Well, there's a lot of overlap, because in mixed use, it refers to, let's see, not in mixed use. In mixed residential, it refers to detached housing.
Yeah, so that's one.
So we're gonna have, and in mixed residential and in mixed use, mixed residential neighborhood type. So mixed use can also include detached housing, I think.
It's not in the
It's-
description.
yeah.
It might be in terms of how the zoning would be applied to that, but
Well-
we're not getting into that.
Yeah, I'm
so-
not super concerned about the zoning, because right now we're describing the concept, so,
Yeah,
yeah.
Well,
I don't know. I think it's good to have a place type with plan view, illustrative, an oblique of an actual place that shows some of the characteristics that we think are important in that place type, and then the types of development that are description for that place type. I think the residential one is even more important to me because it's more about the different types of detached housing. So we wanted to show, not just, what housing looks like in our older historic neighborhoods, but what housing looks like in other neighborhoods that, have maybe different types of detached housing. So I think it's useful to have that, and I think it would be not as clear to have something that's separate and that you have to go back and forth and try and, a matrix could be something that's part of this section, just a table that someone could glance at, but I think it's useful to have this in each of the place types.
so would you repeat them where they do fall in more than one?
Sure. But I think that
But use
detached
different
housing
ones?
is the only one.
Well.
So I think we'd
there-
want to have an example of a detached house that is in a mixed residential neighborhood.
Well, the mixed use includes, mixed residential, we have a residential too, right, or do we? We don't have a residential at all?
In what?
Right.
Mixed use?
We do.
No,
It's
we
toward,
do.
it's toward the end of the
Yeah,
packet.
they're out of order, okay, out of
Yeah,
order and.
Well,
Okay.
I tricked you by putting them in a different order than
Yeah.
the last time I printed
Force
them.
us to actually read it. But, so in residential, mixed residential and mixed use, there is some overlap. And I think that's an opportunity to clarify what we actually imagine these things mean, because they may mean slightly different things in different place types. For example, even in mixed residential, I think you've got in your list, small neighborhood business. And I still can't figure out what a small neighborhood business is, different from a home business under the current ordinance. But if you've got an idea of what it is that would be in that place type, we need to show a picture of it.
Mhm.
And at the moment, we don't.
Yeah, we might not have any good examples from Urbana, so,
Well, we still
need
have
to
to
pull
show what
some,
we mean
yeah.
somehow.
right.
Because I don't know what we mean. I can't think of an example.
That's why, to me, I think it's useful to have the development types in each of these place types, because you can have examples that are specific to those
Right.
place types.
And, okay, I'm buying that.
Okay.
But what I'm saying is, okay, we haven't done that. And I think some of the controversy we're going to face eventually in trying to sell this plan to various people is to be really clear about what we imagine these things actually mean. What do they actually look like? What are we really talking about?
Yeah, I agree. I think this has kind of evolved since we first came up with this.
Yeah.
And so we're kind of going back to what was there. So we had illustrative examples from other places, maybe of things that we didn't have here. And then we took them out, and now we might need to go back and look for examples of these kinds of things that we don't have here, but that we
Yeah.
think might be a good fit, that are, realistic in terms of things like scale, massing, architecture, that we think would be something that would fit in
Right.
these areas in our neighborhoods.
And then explaining that this is the future. These exist now, but these are what we're
Yeah.
looking.
Well, just be clear of what's in these little labels, be clear,
Yeah.
what are things that, this is Urbana, these are what we have.
Yeah.
And then this is something that we don't have, but we think is a good fit.
Yeah, and it applies to the mixed use too, because the mixed use photos are all really commercial buildings. And if we really mean mixed use, well, I don't know what we mean by mixed use, because it doesn't look very mixed to me, let's put it that way. And if I look at the place type site plan for mixed use, it's completely different from the set of photos. It's like two completely different notions of what mixed use is.
Yeah.
And we, so,
Yeah.
number one, I don't know what we mean. And number two, I'm guessing maybe we mean two different things that we need to separate. I'm not sure.
May I make a general comment? And that is, it seems that if we aim to generate and retain interest in this document by Urbana citizens, I'm inclined to say, let's really show Urbana in this. But on the other hand, that's very difficult, I see, and then the end product may contain both Urbana illustrations and photos, as well as others. And I'm tending to say, let's link this to Urbana as much as possible. So the definitions of mixed neighborhood sure have an arm's length from what we encounter in Urbana. I don't know which sites could be developed to look like this. And I think we're talking about more, perhaps low-level intervention than whole sites like this. But then we get to the oblique, and this, I know I had suggested an oblique in a previous meeting, and I really like it because it shows the pieces and their connection. This just isn't recognizable as Urbana in any way, and you in your caption you show how it is generated, and I would love to see this shot of a recognizable neighborhood in Urbana if it was able to illustrate the same things that we see. So that's my general comment. I think we have to work with both, but I favor the one.
Yeah, so I'll make a couple of comments. First, I believe this was inspired by the corner of Green and McCullough, but run through an AI engine. I wasn't the one that did this, and run through an AI engine that sort of created this image here. I'm just guessing, but definitely it doesn't look like that spot unless you know the form of all those buildings along that street. Yeah, and I agree with you about, let's focus on Urbana as much as we can. And while we were talking a couple minutes ago, I was thinking the way that I would like to do this is pull good images from Urbana where we can, and if there's something that we just don't have a good local example of, then the fallback is find a good example from somewhere else.
And I might add, if we are open to adding photographs, the photographs are of Urbana, so they offer a link that I think is very valuable. But if we're talking about mixed use and connection, then a photograph of adjacent buildings seems to contain more than twice the information that a photo of a single building contains.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we don't have an oblique for the mixed use. I think that would solve part of this problem. I mean, I think there are examples of a vertical mixing of uses, like Gregory
Yeah.
Place, that we could include in here.
Right.
In addition to downtown. But the thing that I think that the site plan shows, and that we're trying to communicate, but we don't have really good examples of it, are more of a horizontal mixing of uses, which is more of a finer grain mixing of uses across a larger area. And I know on the future land use map, one of those areas is shown as the triangle around Philo and Washington, which is where the image of Hirachis fits in there. So maybe an oblique that tries to capture that. I mean, it's
Yeah.
something that shows businesses that transition to single-family homes, detached single-family homes, right? And then also, I mean, there's development opportunities that are adjacent to that, which could also be other development types. So that might be one of the areas where we could show this in a way that's not exactly what we imagine it to be, but it has the potential, I guess.
So when I look at the mixed-use description and the examples and think of the future land use map, mixed use seems to be the completely wrong label. I mean, this looks like commercial. It's what people would call commercial. It's got things adjacent to it, and we're allowing residential and commercial as well as offices or whatever. But if it's that simple, I think we're creating a problem for ourselves by opening up something scary to people unnecessarily.
I think the mixed use has been the most sort of problematic to define for us the whole time. So I'm definitely open for for suggestions, or, you know, I have no problem offering my own suggestions as part of the discussion too. But I almost feel like this, you know, it's sort of like a more intense mixed use, whatever we're calling it, which is how we have this separated in the description, but it's almost like we've got, you know, the more intense areas are areas that are more likely to be vertically mixed. And then the areas like Huaraches are sort of the horizontal mix. So perhaps we could use those distinctions to kind of separate these, but it might make sense just to separate this into two different things, since we kind of do it in the definition, but then it's hard when you do it in the definition to really then create one set of photos and one plan view that really encompasses what you're trying to do,
Well,
or
but
what you're trying to
do
say.
you have two separate sets of photos and plan views, right? I mean, if we separate them, then
That's what we
do
would
that.
need. That's what we would need to do, because we have a really,
Right.
you know, we have a really good site plan view that shows horizontal mixing. So we would
Right.
need another one that's sort of more intense
Right.
downtown type mixing.
Or maybe for that case, focus on the oblique, because the oblique would be more appropriate to vertical mixing.
Yeah.
But I think that also, you know, one way people think of mixed uses is we mix everything up. You can build anything anywhere in this place type. And we don't really mean that. So why let people think maybe we mean that?
Yeah, I guess what I'm hearing from Lou is, what do we gain from calling it this kind of horizontal mixing of uses, mixed use, as opposed to a more finer grained detailing of commercial and residential, or commercial and mixed residential? I'm not sure, like,
Yeah.
what are we gaining by trying to more tightly intertwine those in certain areas, as opposed to just being more detailed in how we're identifying these kinds of nodes and transition areas, and then the residential areas that are adjacent to them, I guess.
Well, it's
Yeah.
also part of the distinction that we're sort of just realizing how important it is between place types, which include different development types, and development types. So that site plan has a bunch of commercial and a bunch of different kinds of residential.
Right.
And they're arranged in a particular kind of pattern as a place type. But they aren't mixed uses in the sense that there's a house next to a commercial building, next to an apartment, next to another kind of house, next to a duplex, next to the connotation of mixed use just doesn't do us any favors.
Right, they're not interspersed, I guess, is what the difference is, so.
I agree with these points. If as place types, our keepers are residential, mixed residential, commercial, industrial, I might question whether institutional fits.
Is it still on there?
Mixed use has to do with a transition, it seems, from mixed residential to commercial. And I don't know that we need to call out the transitions the same way we need to call out the sort of the core identities.
Not necessarily. The commercial use here, if you see it, it's more like Meijer, Walmart, at least from what I'm reading. And the mixed use is really like downtown higher density. As I'm reading the description, that seems to be capturing it. It's the density that defines that place type.
I see.
I think that's one, but we have, so that's, I think we can all agree, like downtown and Gregory Place and near campus are examples of that vertical mixing of uses, that more, you know, intense type of development. But when we look at the future land use map, there are other areas where this future land use is mapped to that don't match that. And so we're trying to, that's what we're trying to puzzle through is
But I,
the philo.
but I think, well, no, but
But it has commercial. That's what we're trying to.
Mixed residential should have commercial in it. As I was thinking, like I was just driving my kids to their Taekwondo classes in Savoy. The neighborhood, the residential neighborhood and the commercial neighborhoods are so intertwined, but it works. So if we don't have a mixed residential and commercial, we are missing something.
where were you referring to in Savoy?
Like Savoy Chinooks area. Chinooks, the movie theater, they have like one long strip of commercial, and right behind those, like on Neal
Right.
Street, and right behind those commercial are residential.
Right, but that's the standard tradition of how it's laid out. I mean, Meyer is the same way in Urbana, or whatever, there's residential behind it. So I agree with the distinction I think we're making is between high-density downtown core, vertical, and not. But I think by trying to call it mixed use, it sounds like we're trying to do something different. And I don't think we actually are trying to do anything different in terms of that category. If we look at the future land use map, we're putting a node, more commercial activity, horizontal for the most part, and around it, accessible, made walkable, adjacent, appropriate transitions is residential. And we want to have those nodes frequently enough. And for the adjacent residential next to a big commercial complex like in Savoy, we want to make sure that you can walk, that there's walking connections for the housing that's just west of that theater to the commercial. So it's the Schnucks problem in Urbana, or the walkability to get to Meyer from the east
Right.
or the north. But that's what our future land use map looks like, not only now, but 20 years ago.
Yeah, I think, so it's, to me, it's a difference of, do we take an area, a larger area, and shade it a different color and call it mixed use? Imagining, not really clear what we're imagining happening in the area, or do we apply like a finer grained approach to it, where we identify where are the commercial areas that we expect to be commercial, and then how those transition to residential areas right adjacent to it, right? So yeah, when you zoom back far enough, it's a mixing of uses, right? But when you get in close, then you still have this clear distinction between the commercial areas that make sense along, you know, arterials or minor arterials or whatever, higher density connectors, right? And then you have the residential areas that are adjacent to but separate from that, right? Is that really what we're trying to achieve, or are we actually in other places trying to achieve that kind of actual, like, interspersed mixing of uses that we see in really downtown? I mean, that's kind of the only place currently, and Gregory Place, but doesn't exist in other places, right, so far. So I don't know. I mean, it's, to me,
Yeah.
it's what we're trying to achieve. Like, we could say, yeah, we want this area around Philo and Washington. We want that to be something where future development is much more interspersed, where we have, you know, commercial, residential, some kind of pattern like that, right? Which is not what the current pattern looks like. So it would be different, and that's what I think we would need to be clear about how we're presenting this and communicating it.
You think that's what we do want?
No, I think we need to clarify what we do want, if that's what we want, or if what we really want is what we've been talking about, a more fine-grained mapping of these different place types of commercial adjacent to mixed residential or adjacent to residential.
If we ignore my previous comment that seemed to diminish the importance of mixed use here, I'm ready to revisit that. It seems like any main street would be mixed use, retail, on especially with vertical integration of these uses. It seems to be desirable if we're stressing walkability. That is, we want to bring housing and commercial activity closer together. And as I mentioned, there are many precedents for this. So no, I see it as something other than a simple transition. However, the plan as shown really shows it as a transition rather than an integration.
So is the major intent here to make explicit that we want residential in high-density commercial areas? Is that what mixed use is really about? Is it that in downtown Urbana, we don't want to think of the whole downtown core as being commercial and no residential?
Right.
So we want to add residential to the highest intensity commercial zones. And I use zones there accidentally, but it actually sort of helps make clear what the issue is. And maybe that's what we need to say. And maybe for some of the nodes in the future land use map, we want to say whether they are dense enough, intense enough, that we're really talking about, you want to build residential building, you want to build a commercial building, you want to build a building with commercial on the first floor, please don't, and residential on the second floor, because we've got too many of those. But that seems to me what we really want to say.
Our definition of, or our portrayal of commercial really seems to me to show vehicle accessible commercial.
Yeah, that's the problem. We've got to have these two types.
Yeah, yeah. And I agree with that, our aim is, yes, we need something other than commercial, which we illustrate as a vehicle-accessible strip or mall.
Right, so I think what I'm hearing is that we're in agreement that downtown should be described as mixed use, that it's different than commercial. But I think
Great,
what we haven't, in Gregory Place, but what we haven't necessarily reached a consensus on or clear direction on is what to do about what is currently mapped as mixed-use secondary in the future land use map. Those are the ones that don't have that current intensity or vertical mixing of uses, right? They have a mixing if you draw the circle large enough, right? If you draw the circle very tight, then it's just commercial, and then it transitions to residential. And that's what when we look at this site plan, this is commercial, and this is mixed residential, or residential below, right? They're not interspersed.
Yeah.
And that, I wouldn't say that was by design. The students weren't trying to put forward a certain perspective on this, but I think that's kind of how we imagined this, right? So it's not this interspersed mixing of things where you have different development types right next to each other, right, from one parcel to the next. But you have them adjacent to each other, which we could also just say is commercial and then some kind of residential type, right?
And if we enlarge our illustrations to show adjacencies of buildings for mixed use, we might include like the Vine Street housing with an adjacent building to show here's a horizontal integration, or a shot from Gregory Place where it's vertical. We have other examples of retail plus commercial. If those were our illustrations, I think they would strengthen this and even maybe highlight it as desirable.
So I kind of want to bring back this concept that we brought forward, I think the first time we ever talked about this. And it's the way we're describing these place types is that we're going, it's sort of a continuum from, I'd say, mostly residential to mostly commercial. And we're just sort of describing different segments along that continuum. And then we have some, I'd say some special things like green spaces or industrial areas. And those are sort of the ones that you really don't expect any sort of mixing to be happening inside, in an area that's just industrial or just green space. So it's really how I think it's just coming up with the best ways to describe this continuum that we're talking about.
I think I can see the continuum from residential to mixed residential to right now what you call mixed use. But the commercial, as it's showing here, and as if we are used, well, actually the commercial picture here might not be reflecting on what your site plan looks like. It's more like what we were discussing, car accessible, even though it's in the neighborhood, it's totally a different animal than if you're thinking about Washington and Philo, those little smaller scale, walkable on the continuum of residential to mixed residential and commercial. This commercial itself seems to be referring to something very different.
Yeah, I would agree. And but the area for Philo and Washington, I'm pretty sure we have it on here as a mixed use and not as a commercial. But I'd throw out sort of For sort of the lesser intense areas that we've been calling mixed use, I consider those to be sort of like your neighborhood commercial center. So it might just be a few buildings clustered together that are just businesses that mainly serve the neighborhood. And that, so that could be a way to conceive of that and separate sort of that less intense and it's not necessarily mixed use even. It might just be sort of, I think in our current plan, we probably call it neighborhood business. So maybe we keep that one. I don't know. So.
It turns out that the reasons that some of our current plan and some of our current zoning ordinance use labels that they do, because maybe they actually work pretty well.
Yeah.
And we ought to be figuring out what it is we really want to tweak from them. Because I agree, your run through just now of the idea of neighborhood business,
Yeah.
that makes sense to me, though this idea of neighborhood serving, I think, is a stretch, because I still don't know what that means. I still don't know of an example of that, let's put it that way. I don't know any place in Champaign-Urbana that has a cluster of neighborhood-serving businesses that actually serve that neighborhood as opposed to drawing from elsewhere and relying on drawing from elsewhere to be in business.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I have an example.
And again, there may be a reason that neither you nor I can come up with an example that maybe that it doesn't actually work that way.
The examples I would think of would be Gregory Place, Bake Lab, Hugo, and they probably require at least a 50% contribution from outside the neighborhood to make the retail actually work.
Right, exactly. And Bake Lab was one of the ones I was thinking of.
Yeah.
Because you get, especially if they build that new building, Bake Lab will have a pretty good draw from the neighborhood that can walk in. But when I go to the Bake Lab, it's jockeying cars in the little parking space behind. And those of us doing that didn't come across from the other side of Lincoln in our cars.
So maybe a different terminology is what I'm hearing.
Yeah. Okay, I think we've got some direction here, so we can go back to the drawing board, not all the way back, but
I want
tweak
to
some things.
comment on a couple of the other place types. If that's what we're ready to do. Well, I think the only one where, I've got minor stuff like graphics stuff to worry about. I think for industrial, I don't think we should be saying that industrial is necessarily on the periphery, because the periphery doesn't stay that way. And the notion of putting things at the edge of town because we don't want them near us is a bad image to use. The other thing is, I think we ought to be intentional about industrial. That is, we want industrial in the particular area because we want to take advantage of rail access, and we don't want people building houses there and taking away the opportunity to have a different kind of facility there that actually might pay taxes, at least to the city, if not to the school district, and not send any, well, anyway, be a good revenue to cost generator for the city. And I don't know that I think we don't need to keep the industrial zone along the south side of University, but we should be protecting the industrial on the north side of University intentionally, which I assume we are, but. And the reason to be very explicit about rail is because we are going to give up rail in a particular area, and we ought to be protecting rail in the other area, and we ought to say that explicitly in what we're up to.
I thought we had talked about making a distinction between certain types of industrial that would be, I don't know, like not just heavy industrial, but industrial that is, disamenity, things that we don't want other
Right.
things next to, versus less intense types of things that some might call industrial that are actually a good fit, because the area that's north of University is actually shown as commercial, and I thought we talked about making commercial more expansive to try and capture some of those things that some people might classify as an industrial in a technical sense, but
Yeah,
in terms of the activities, they're actually things that would be a better fit or would be appropriate in the areas that we call commercial.
Yeah, that's definitely the intent.
right, but this comes back to being, we have to elaborate these things
Right.
so that they're
Right.
aware, because I agree with you. But Flexingate is not what I would call fitting in with commercial. That's why I'm distinguishing
Right.
between the north side and the south side, and being explicit about giving up the rail on the south side, recognizing Flexingate, and emphasizing the North Urbana rail. Now, the other thing is, if we're gonna have a commercial that includes labs, or if we're gonna have a commercial that, we have to be able to say that in downtown Urbana, there are certain kinds of commercial uses we don't want. And they're different from the south side of University and downtown Urbana. And at this point, I don't, to a certain extent, that's a zoning decision to make when we get to the zoning ordinance. But I think we have to talk about that in the plan so that we know what we're up to.
But they would be different development. They're different place types. So downtown Urbana would be mixed use as a place type.
Yeah,
So we would
But-
need to describe the kinds of commercial that we imagine being appropriate for that place type.
right, so place types, development types. Definitions, the problem is commercial means three things. To an architect, it means a building standard. To a citizen, it means place where I go shopping. To a zoning ordinance, it means a whole set of other things, and we want to change what we think that is a little bit for some commercial zones. So we got to allow all this in our discussion, our
Yeah.
description of what commercial is.
I struggle with coming up with a better word though, because it is all about commerce, right?
Right.
Like
No,
that's,
I think the word
about
is
that,
fine,
yeah.
but we've got to say that in the plan, in the descriptions, including our development types and so on, we're going to use that word. We just have to we have to elaborate in the various instances what it means.
Yeah, I think it's fine. Like if you look at the mixed use description, it doesn't talk about commercial. It describes things like businesses, offices, whatever. So if we want to add more nuanced descriptions, we can do that without defaulting to commercial. And then
right,
within the commercial place type, we can make that list more expansive, to capture some of these light industrial type activities that we think would be appropriate in those areas.
One of the terms we used before, and when you talked about, the derivative of commercial is commerce, we talked about commerce centers at one point, and I don't know if that's a better
Activity centers.
descriptor or not.
Yeah, activity centers, we said, didn't we?
Yeah, we did, and that's on the development opportunities map, as we have some of these areas called out as activity centers.
Yeah. Anyway, I think that's the only other comment I had on the place types or the development types.
Okay, so let's move along here.
So an easier question for you. Some of those photos you have current, some has example. What do you mean by current and example?
I didn't put these together, so I'm not totally sure what the thinking was behind some of these.
You have to own these now.
That's right.
There is only you now. I think this is just how this evolved over time, and so it needs the final touch of a single author to make the imprint make sense. So that was meant
Yeah,
to be
good
an
point,
example
though.
of a
Yeah.
duplex. So it's an example of a development type.
I think in an earlier version, the ones on the left were current and the ones on the right were
Future.
future, which
So
is no
it
longer
just needs to
true.
be cleaned up.
There's lots of editing at that level through everything.
Okay.
Were we gonna do something different with the green,
With the green
Spaces.
spaces?
I thought we had talked about not including the pictures of this, but and if we were, I think it would be better to include pictures that weren't just pictures of the park sign. So to pictures that more accurately
Yeah.
captured the different type of green space that these are. So like Meadowbrook is a restored meadow prairie, right? So something like that. Weaver Park is like a constructed wetland, right? Something like that. So if we want to try and capture the wide array of, I guess, land cover types and activities that go on at the different green spaces, then different, and you didn't take these images, that's not on you, but something other than just the signs.
Kevin, are you saying that the oblique photo where we have one example, that it's just a matter of using the app to generate one? If that's the case, I think they may be useful for green space, for industrial, where we're trying to capture the scale of an area, I think better than we can with a facade photo.
Yeah. So when I saw that oblique image, I was like, oh, that looks pretty nice. So I think I'll mess around with the tool and try and create that for one of these other place types. And after a few hours, I was like, I couldn't do it well enough in those few hours. That's not to say it can't be done. Obviously, somebody did it. So we might be able to do that for other things, but.
I think what the students were trying to do, we had this debate about whether or not we could use Google Images in the plan itself. I mean, we could use them for our discussion here, certainly, but so they were trying to, take a Google image and alter it enough so that it wasn't recognizable as a place, because the students didn't have access to the software that staff has. So I think we can create these that don't require them to be altered, in any way, so they'll actually look like places in Urbana.
And I don't see any reason we couldn't find examples for discussion purposes, talk about them, and then once we've settled on that, then, you know, create our own images if we need to do that.
I'm sorry, still trying to understand the discussion of mixed use core and secondary. How many places did we label that's mixed use secondary?
Yeah, so I can pull up the future place types map. Actually, let me. This one, okay. So the secondary we labeled. So there's some areas that are sort of along the periphery. Want the hand here? Yeah, there we go. Yeah, this is much easier than a pointer. So like this area up here, the old Illinois American water lagoons that are vacant along Bradley and Lincoln, we labeled as sort of that secondary type place type. A little bit along the north side of University Avenue. Because I saw potential there for sort of maybe a better sort of intensity of use than exists there right now. Like the area just south of Crystal Lake Park. You know, there's some older apartments and things and some older commercial
Kevin, if you go
spots
to the
and things.
development opportunities map, they're marked on it.
On the, oh, are they? Okay, yeah, that might be easier. Do I have that?
It may be the same, it may just be scrolling down from the future land use map, that's the way I've got it.
Yeah, let me go back to that, okay.
Yeah, go on more. Yeah, here you go.
Are they all, yeah, they might all be flagged here. Or, not all of them, but,
Well, I think if there's one missing, it's an edit that we need to deal with.
well, so are you saying they're labeled as either an activity center or a development opportunity?
Well, I think the activity centers, the ones you just described, are they orange with red dashes? And the Walmart should also be an activity center. That's the one I've got noted as
Okay,
labeled. And if there, I guess what I'm saying is if there are others that are missing, they should be here.
yeah, I feel like this future, or this development opportunities map is a little more blobby than the future land use map, because the future land use map essentially has to, or sorry, the place types map has to sort of paint everything in the city with something. So this one I see as maybe a little more conceptual, not.
Yeah,
I don't-
right,
yeah.
that's the intent. But but these are still supposed to be, what we want to be thinking about initially in the plan as a background is where do we want activity centers?
Yeah,
Gradually, including when we get to the zoning ordinance, we're going to draw parcel boundary explanations of specific things, but
yeah. Well, I mean, like, for example, the area I just described just south of Crystal Lake Park is just, it's nothing really on this map. But,
and I think it should be a corridor because university is really a corridor, not an activity center.
yeah, I could go with that.
We've got 3 corridors identified, but we don't have university identified. And I think, and the difference, like Lincoln and North Cunningham, it's not an activity center, it's not a concentrated point, it's
Right.
the whole thing, basically.
But yeah, I'm gonna go back here and just see. So. Yeah, I think we did pick up those, because we don't have that many, so there's a little bit on Philo, the one at Washington and Philo, and then some adjacent to sort of downtown along that university corridor, and then that piece up there, the Illinois American Water Lagoons.
The Washington and Philo missing on this one?
No, it's here as that sort of secondary core. It's this piece here.
Oh, okay. I was misreading, well,
But it's
Okay.
on this map, it shows it as sort of the southwestern portion of this activity center, but then we're kind of going up to include sort of this DART
all right,
site for
okay.
whatever might
Yeah.
happen there.
Kevin, on that other map, is it the rose color that's the secondary core? Or
It's
is it
this,
the hatching?
yeah, it's this weird
That's
rose
what
color.
threw me
All
off.
right, thank you.
Yeah, the hatching is the community development target areas.
Shifting color scheme that threw me off, that
Yeah.
the secondary cores are lavender and not.
Yeah, and it doesn't help that I was zoomed out to here. It's kind of hard to see. But a couple other things, I think on this map, I had only noted one other change that we had talked about, and that was, and this can be wordsmith, but I know Lou last time said, be explicit that when the rail gets abandoned, what do we want to do? So I said, repurpose that as a multi-use path, and since we've got some sort of industrial areas there already, I said, consider rezoning those in advance. I might, if that's all right. I don't know if that's too straightforward.
So, one of my reactions in having spent some time with this map is it needs a lot of editing of, there's too much on it, and not enough. There's not enough of what you just added,
Yeah,
which is actually specific, useful information that tells us something that's significant in the plan.
yeah,
There's a lot of other stuff that's labels that get in the way and so on. And I started to edit it, but then I decided that it makes much more sense to actually edit the actual document than for me to run around with comments trying to edit it. But we need more of what you just did.
and I think the other comments on here, so I'm pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong, Dustin, but did the students, they took the existing marked up version or the existing future land use map with all of the annotations that we as staff had already marked up and gotten rid of a lot of sort of extraneous info, and then they put that on here, okay.
That's what it's intended to be, but I think they left too much of the descriptive stuff on there.
As well as they took stuff in the big ideas, big moves, little moves.
Oh, yeah.
That had an obvious spatial aspect to it, and put that on the map.
Okay.
And some of that, the spatial location stuff of it doesn't quite work graphically. That's another thing that needs to be edited. But anyway.
Yeah.
And while you're mentioning that, on the development opportunities map, the rail abandonment, the thing you just did on that map needs to be on the development opportunities map too, because it actually is one of the major development opportunities, because
Yeah.
the whole length of that is, it's like another corridor option. It's a,
So now as we start to look at the maps, starting to realize that there are two different things here. One is since that you can have a big block of residential, mixed residential, commercial, and then there are things, it's not necessarily concentrated in a big block. It can be a corridor, it can be locally concentrated activity places. It just seems to be in our place type, everything except that mixed use is, you can find big patches of it in the city, but that mixed use is, the shape of it is not always kind of so regular. And I was just wondering if that is something to capture, if we can develop something to capture this intense activity along some corridor, or just, it just seems to be different than all the other types.
Text to describe all these things, including text annotating the maps is one way to maybe do that.
So, Ru, what you're saying is that the one we had hard time to think the mixed use, if this text description has more of the aerial maps of places that it is here, kind of embedded in this document, instead of the photos of individual business that might illustrate place type better.
Yeah, I think we need to make explicit connections between these maps and the place type and development type descriptions, both ways, both saying something in there so you know to look at a map to understand how they're arranged, like you're saying, but also be able to look at the map, and the map should cross-reference the place types so that I know which the maps don't very well do right now because of the way they're labeled. They're not labeled consistently to go back and forth. And then the maps need text to explain what the map is trying to communicate, as well as the text that we have with the photos and the place types. So it needs to say something there. These place types are at activity centers or these place types are along corridors as shown in map X. Or map X should say, or the map, the annotated map, which needs a lot of work, should indicate that this type is place type of a particular, with a particular intent.
That will make a lot more sense to me. Another thing I have a hard time to make connection is all the site plan prototype, mixed residential. That one, maybe I can imagine a place in Urbana looks like this. Mixed residential looks fine, mixed residential looks fine, commercial looks fine. It's this mixed use site plan, I think
sir.
needs some adjustment. If we look at this site plan and then look at all the mixed use in Urbana, I can't find anything like that. It doesn't register with me. So this one seems to be out of place a little bit.
It's the southwest corner of Windsor and Philo Road.
Well,
The
but
pond.
it's funny though, because on the place types,
It's commercial.
it is mixed in that it cuts off here and this is commercial and this is mixed residential.
Well, but the brown buildings up in the upper right, I don't have control of your cursor, are residential.
Oh, these?
These buildings are
Okay.
residential.
Currently vacant.
Oh, I gotcha. So there are some
And-
residential
and
mixed in.
I-
Yeah,
I
that's
can't
what
remember
the,
whether I've worked at editing on
Oh.
that graphic yet or not, but you didn't notice that, which is a graphic flaw, not your flaw. In
I
other
mean,
words,
there's not a legend on here, right?
Details.
On this
and
piece, so
it
yeah.
also means that we need to be able to distinguish those buildings, so another example is to put lines to imply gable roofs, which is one way to sort of, oh, that's a residential
Right.
building, not a flat-roofed commercial building. There are graphic tricks for this stuff. We
Yeah.
just, we don't have quite the staff to,
To be drawing lines in the middle of
yeah,
buildings, yeah.
right.
But I still have the problem, this is the philo, but this is, it's used for mixed-use site plan, but it is not in the, in our map listed as mixed use, so.
Well, it's not supposed to be identified. We're just
Right.
saying that the
It's just
students
conceptual.
based it on that,
Yeah,
but we're not,
but again, like this type of mixed use does not match with any of the mixed use I can imagine in Urbana that is being picked out. Can you imagine any of those sites being developed to something like this?
Of which sites? Of
Any
the ones
place
that are identified?
Mixed use core and mixed use secondary.
I mean, I could. So the mixed use sort of that's at Philo in Florida. There's a lot of empty parking lots there. I could see some apartment buildings filling those in.
Well, and the Windsor Activity Center on the Development Opportunities map is explicitly this area. I mean, again, we're not supposed to be thinking of it as
Right.
actually for this area, but that's what it really is.
So again, I think what I cannot come to understanding is like my comments before, mixed use core and mixed use secondary, usually they are kind of has irregular density. You can, if you imagine what you just said, south of Crystal Lake around University, that's kind of more what I was thinking, potentially mixed-use core and mixed-use secondary would look like. This one still feels out of place. That's kind of why when I'm flipping through this, when you say, like, the picture here and the site type here and the mixed use description it's not coherent for me. I don't know why, but it doesn't feel right.
I think this is just one more confirmation that mixed use is a label that's getting us into a mess. And we need to figure out what it is we want to describe. And I think we maybe now have 3 things instead of just 2. Because as Shenxi is pointing out, mixed-use secondary as a node is not what this looks like. But actually, it's designed to be that. It's at a lower density, but a larger node than Philo and Washington. This doesn't look like, but I might argue that this is the DART site. Flip it 180 degrees,
Yeah.
and it's, if it were the DART site, it'd probably be slightly denser at the commercial part, I would hope. But it has residential and commercial, high-density residential and commercial sort of intermixed at the arterial and minor collector intersection, and
Yeah, I think now it makes sense that this is a place type we want to have, but
Yeah.
this place type does not match with our core and secondary core. This is, what is this?
yeah, I think you've pointed out exactly the problem. And making it into three types, or figuring out how to relabel them is something we gotta do.
I mean, I see, I really like where this is going. I'm fully on board with all these place types and their identification on the map. It strikes me it might help to make more Urbana linked our identification of place types if there was sort of a smaller map of Urbana that actually pulled out the elements that we're talking about. So that you don't have to go, from the place type description to going through the legend and then running it out. Just sort of having pop out to you what we're talking about in Urbana on a map. I don't know. Just
So calling them out, like show a
kinda-
smaller
kinda-
map,
kinda
and then
just-
this is a bigger version
Yeah,
of
if you
what
had
that
a
is.
half page or, a small map that just was able to do what we do in the larger map, but just to help identify what we're talking about in the place types. Maybe there's a downside to doing that.
Are you talking about like tying this to an actual place? Is that what you're
No,
talking
no, no. If it's possible to do that, and I think having done it with the Pines is very good. No, I'm talking about adding a map at each of these place type descriptions that says, for Urbana, we're talking about this,
Yeah.
and this. I don't know.
So where examples of that place type are?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Like
I like that
call-
idea.
Calling it out, you've got
Calling
an
it out.
inset, yeah, you have a map, and then you call it out with a more detailed map
you
that
can
says
get it by
what's there.
reference to this map, but just to say, oh, what we're talking about is this.
The only issue I see with that is that some of these idealized place types don't
Yeah.
Don't-
necessarily exist.
Right, I appreciate that there'd be a downside to it.
Yeah,
And we don't want to tie site plan examples to specific places.
Yeah.
Because we are not proposing site plans for specific places. We're
Right.
trying to develop them with a heuristic of taking someplace and tweaking it so that we know how to tie it into what Urbana is like.
yeah, I mean, this almost, just conceptually, if we were to have a map like that, it would point to a spot, we'd get the oblique image of it, and we'd say, here's an example of an area that has some of these characteristics. And then you'd say, and if you sprinkled in a couple of things and you added to that image, this is how it could turn into sort of this idealized thing. So, you pop in a couple of little apartment buildings here and there, you throw a corner store in there, voila, we've got, neighborhood center or whatever.
I mean, I think in a formal sense, it's sufficient to have the place description as we have it, and then to have a larger map that identifies it. That's certainly sufficient.
Okay, so where were we?
Page 2.
Okay, I'm not sure. I know, Lou, you said this map probably needs a lot of work. I'm not sure how we want
Well,
to tackle that. Probably not.
So let's, if we're, in order to have some structure, let's just go through the three maps.
Yeah,
I mean, briefly.
yeah,
And this is not the place to do the kind of editing has to be done, so
Right.
substantive stuff.
right.
On this map,
Actually,
the
let me
upper
pull up this
left,
one. Yeah,
it's not clear to me that this, I can't point. There. It's not clear to me that the stuff to the right of the creek should actually be industrial.
yeah.
I don't think we've made that expectation that I'm aware of. Maybe we have, but it's sort of a surprise to me because it's not clear to me why we would do that.
So I think, so I need to go back, and if anybody's watching the tape later or watching at home now, the hatched areas on this map actually show changes between the existing future land use map and then this map. So, but actually they don't show all of them. So never mind. Those, yeah, because this green area here should be shown as a change. So I'm not sure. So I thought this was industrial because the current future land use showed it as industrial. It may actually have everything north of Olympian as sort of future planning area, though. I'm not sure. But Lou, you brought your comp plan, so,
Light industrial
Is
on
that-
the right, yeah.
okay.
But it's not that area.
Did not all the way. So this is south of Fort Harris
Oh,
and
that's
west of,
existing land use. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong map.
No, go the other way.
Yeah, it's not shown.
Hard to tell. I think
This
it has the
block-
color of light industrial.
oh, yeah, it probably does. Light industrial is really hard to see on the existing future land use map because it's laid over the aerial.
Been left out in the sun, maybe.
It's been used a lot. In any case,
Yeah.
I question whether we want a square mile at that location identified as industrial. I don't know, but it's extraterritorial anyway. But it's still
Right.
a kind of massive allocation of land to industrial.
I'm
And
gonna pop over to this other, I wanna see the, okay, I just wanted to make sure that so this area is all served by, or
no,
serviceable
gravity.
by gravity
Yeah,
sanitary
so it's a
sewer.
development
So, yeah.
opportunity,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
it,
But-
it,
but that-
anyway,
yeah.
so what I said I was gonna try to focus on is substantive stuff, like
Yeah.
questions of what is it we actually wanna do?
yeah,
And that one, I think we need to look into.
Oh, come
The
on.
other thing is the greened space,
yes,
which is slightly different from the previous plan. Not, basically, you've put somebody has put a green buffer on the east side of the creek, which isn't shown in the other plan.
right. Well, and also on the okay, so the west side
is in the
was,
previous plan.
no, the west side is in the previous plan as rural residential, I think. And the green here is green
Okay, you
space.
could be, yeah, that could be. But in any case, we need to have a reason stated why that is shown the way it's shown. And I'm guessing it in part has to do with protecting a stream corridor from an
Correct.
environmental point of view.
Right.
But it's not intended as green space in a zoning sense, I don't think.
Right.
So this is an example where we need to annotate it with an intention, something more like your statement up for the Kickapoo Rail Trail. I don't know what
Yeah.
it is. Again, I mean, it's not that there's an answer, it's that we need to figure out what it is we want to say.
Can we go back to the industrial question? So earlier Lou made a comment that when we think about areas that we want to show as industrial, we should do it based on the characteristics of the place, as in their access to rail or highway or something like that. So, I mean, can we do that and sort of think through the logic of the areas that we've identified as industrial? And does that hold with why those make sense?
Yeah, I mean, for this area, I don't know that it makes as much sense as, like, for this area that's next to the railroad, that's closer to the Lincoln Avenue 74 interchange. I mean, it's not like this area is far from 74 here. So you could have, that has decent truck freight access. I don't know that all the way back here. Well, I mean, it's not too far, but I don't, maybe,
But-
yeah.
But there are road improvement issues and a whole
Right.
bunch of other things. If that's really going to be, if we think of that, anyway, we need to think about it. It's also a corridor that's commercial at the moment, I think.
Yeah, I mean, what is out there that's not agricultural land is commercial.
Yeah.
Talking about on Cunningham or
On North
Olympian.
Cunningham.
Cunningham?
Yeah, on 42 North.
Yeah.
Route 45.
Okay, well, I've
45.
flagged
Sorry,
those.
I'm in Ohio.
All right.
So let's see, what else have I got on this one? There's some graphic stuff. Some of the annotations are in the wrong place. We don't need to deal with that.
Lou, we're going to have to get you your own software, graphic software.
I no longer have the graphic software
Yeah.
on my computers because I'm not at the university. On this map, I think it's an editing issue, but it applies to the other map as well. We need to go back to Brad Bennett and make sure that the way we're describing the sewer stuff is actually correct. Because the details for Yankee Ridge subdivision, for Berkey's, for, anyway. And I think we've got it. I'm not sure that it's right, but Brad could probably,
Got it on here.
so yeah, that's all I've got on that map. I don't know if anybody else
So
has
Lou, going
that.
back to your sewer question, are you saying, I know we have it on the development opportunities map,
Yeah, and
but not
and
on
when we
this.
get there,
Are you-
I've asked the same question again because I think it is correct on this map, but I want to make sure. Because the details matter. I'm a little surprised, for example, that Yankee Ridge subdivision is entirely on septic. That doesn't make sense to me, but it may be true.
I thought everything south of Windsor was outside of the,
No, because, I
not
mean,
everything,
South.
but
Clark
yeah.
Lindsay isn't the stuff,
Yeah,
but over,
east of.
yeah, towards High Cross,
the-
goes from
Anyway,
five.
there is stuff south of Windsor that I know is on sewers, which is shown on the Development
Okay.
Opportunities map. It's
We'll
just,
check
I'm
that.
a little surprised about a couple of details. But anyway, that, we can come back to that if we want.
okay.
when we get
Wanted
to the other
to, okay, so the mobility map, I made some very, well, I did add a couple of annotations that we had discussed, but that I will make more beautiful.
So, Um,
But I added a couple of
that's
things.
different from the printout you gave us, right?
It is, yeah, because I did
Okay.
this within the last week.
Yeah, so some of these I think are actually, you and I had the same reaction, but I gotta get my copy up again.
Yeah, so first, sort of over here in the green that's impossible to read probably, is, it says to implement the recommendations of the Lincoln Avenue study, whatever the official name of that is, that we're just wrapping up here shortly. Another is, I kind of just circled or drew a line around all of University Avenue from the western edge of the city to the eastern edge out by Walmart, and said that this isn't the greatest statement, but I just said redesign University Avenue corridor through town to be safer. And then in parentheses, I put IDOT controlled. We can tweak that, but
Well, yeah, okay.
another
Now,
thing,
for this map, if it gets too busy, using numbers over to the
Yeah.
legend may still be a good,
that's probably what I'll do. I just wanted to sort of plop them on the map for
Yeah.
discussion purposes.
and another thought on the graphics, where you've done Lincoln, I think we ought to do the symbols for projects in the same color as the street type,
Mhm.
maybe? Or somehow, anyway, there, or maybe the numbers for the projects,
Yeah.
anyway, an idea. But I like that you've come up with some symbology to try to get the graphics for projects in there.
Then the other thing was we had talked about how bad the intersection is at Main and Vine. So I just said to redesign the Main and Vine Street intersection to be safer. It's a very broad statement, but
Now, these are additions to the project list.
yeah,
So these are,
these are ones we
we've
had.
got projects and we've got proposals or something.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of these are things we talked about at previous study sessions. Some of them, like the Lincoln Avenue study, is going on right now.
So I think we should distinguish between projects that are real, either
Yeah.
going on or already approved.
Versus
Or listed,
recommendations.
yes,
or- Yeah,
Recommendations,
yeah.
yeah.
In the recommendations, many of those came from public input too. I mean, there's,
Yeah, well.
when you
but-
talk about safety, almost everybody brought up that intersection.
Yeah. But they go in the plan as recommendations because institutionally, we decide that we want to put them there, not just because somebody brought them up.
Okay, and then the last one on here was this, I said to redesign Illinois Street between Race and Vine, because that's already something that we're planning to do, but just to call that out on here.
The stuff, the project that's happening on North Lincoln, is that on here?
I did not put that on there, but yeah, there is wait, is that what the number?
That's what
That
3
might be
is.
what 3 is, I think, and they had put number 4 on as well, which was the Vine Street project. So, shoot, what number was that? 3? Yeah, so that's that North Lincoln one. The students have put that on already.
Might be helpful to reference the street on those descriptions too, so you know that it is Lincoln.
Yeah.
So those are the, because you had said you had some list or idea of these. Is that all the ones that you're aware of?
Yes, but I'll talk to our public works folks and make sure I'm not missing anything.
Anyone else?
So
Commission know of any of the projects we should talk about or problem areas, mobility-wise?
So North Cunningham is not classified on this map at the moment.
Yeah, I put I marked up not this map, but somewhere, I put a big question mark on that.
And
It seems to be classified as an interstate, actually, but that's not
well,
right.
it-
I mean,
in
sometimes
any
it drives
case,
like
it's
an
not
interstate. It's-
correctly
yeah.
classified.
Yeah.
And I would reverse some of the color coding, but we can talk about that at a different level.
Well, so one thing I kind of wanted to talk about is whether we want to identify these as they are identified here. Because these are what are, and I passed out this sheet tonight to describe what functional classification is, because that's a term that, road engineers use to classify roads, and it really separates them into a hierarchy, mostly based on just speed and how much local access there is. So, and one of the reasons that I wanted to talk about street typologies and to come up with a different way of describing streets in this plan was so that we could get away from sort of this focus on speed, which is what functional classification is about a lot. So I don't know that I would want us to go with this map, sort of painting these as arterials and collectors. That's why we're here for discussion.
I'm going to disagree halfway. That is, I think this number of distinctions is about right. And I think there's a reason to keep connected to this other one. But I think we have attempted in what the students did to develop cross-section versions so we can describe these as something more than speed. And maybe, we create labels or a parallel set of labels or an annotation to these labels to make them say more than just speed. But to me, partly because I live on them, the distinction between an access street and a minor collector and a major collector and an arterial is more than just speed. Because it's the street cross-section, it's, if we're going to talk about activity nodes, it makes sense on intersections, especially of major arterials and major collectors, or major collectors and minor collectors or whatever. And so there's a logic to this that I think is useful.
If we were to come up with some other typology for classifying them, would we run into problems like, so obviously RPC thinks of these in this way.
Right.
So would we run into problems in terms of communicating things to RPC and them back to us? I think our, not positive, but I think our manual of practice refers to these type of classifications in terms of describing, you know, the widths of right-of-ways and the configurations and those kind of things. So would we have to redo a lot of things if we were to make that kind of change? And would that make sense, I guess?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I haven't gotten into the details on that, but that's a very fair point.
That's another reason to try to make these do more work toward what we want to do, rather than getting rid of them.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to, you know, we're talking about things like a city of connected neighborhoods, and it's so when you're talking like that, but then you've got sort of a lot of these minor arterials in red on here, and arterials being described as characterized by the ability to quickly move relatively large volumes of traffic. That
Where is that description?
that's on the thing that I handed out to you. Yeah, I pulled some stuff from RPC, and I condensed it down onto this one map. So this was like a 3-page memo.
So, this is what I mean by we should write our own descriptions.
Yeah.
And give them additional meaning. When we did the development opportunities map, we're trying in identifying a corridor of Washington, of doing extra arrows so that say, okay, this is a corridor because it connects things.
Right.
But it also shouldn't be a separator. It shouldn't be a barrier. So it's not just a east-west corridor. It's got north-south
Yeah.
crossings. So I agree, we should rewrite these descriptions of what they are. And then, that gives us a sort of automatic translation.
Yeah, I
To
mean,
what
they're-
Justin's talking about.
Their descriptions are also very theoretical. I mean, there's very few instances of, you know, arterials of major or minor types within the city that hew exactly to this kind of description, right? That don't
Right.
allow access to parcels or something like that. So, yeah, I think it would be useful to describe it in a way that maybe more accurately reflects what we have. I think these kinds of things are done after the fact, right? So a place develops over 100 years, and then you go back in and you throw these classifications on it based on how people use it, kind of, but it doesn't always match.
Yeah, but then, I mean, over time, they try and change things to match. So, like, their CUATS/RPC, they have their access management guidelines that say, like, on this type of road, you can't have, you know, you need X amount of space between driveways,
Right.
because that's access, like, control, which aligns with sort of that description.
Right, and we use that going forward, because we use that in subdivision approval, and like Windsor Road, the number of access points on Windsor Road between Race and Philo is drastically less than on a minor collector or a major collector, because I think it's an arterial.
It is, yeah, and you see how fast people drive on Windsor and how hard it is to cross Windsor, so.
I understand, but we also probably don't want to change the possibility of different access, street connection access, driveways and streets we want the ability to have that distinction, it seems to me. So, again, we have to enhance these descriptions.
Mhm.
So, what are the pedestrian crossing mechanisms on whatever Windsor is, a minor arterial or a major arterial? And the crossing at the end of Vine Street into Meadowbrook is an example, where it's specifically created with a center island and a sideways tilted Center Island, so people have to stop and turn and look at the traffic. I mean, it's,
Yeah, and also what do the, pedestrian and bicycle facilities look like on arterials? Obviously, they don't describe anything related to those other users, right, in terms of how they're thinking of it, but
which
I
is
think we
what
can
this
be
set of
more
stuff
expansive,
is trying to do.
right?
Yeah. So should we move along to that?
Well, we haven't, well, we could move to that. We haven't looked at the development opportunities map yet,
Oh, yeah,
which I think is in the same folder before you jump to other folders.
yeah.
Or other file.
I've already got that we should identify Walmart as an activity center. Was that right?
And we need to add Kickapoo Trail. We need to add University Avenue as a corridor.
Yeah.
And I suggest that we identify industrial development opportunities by the railroad. I think we still have available parcels. And I think we want people to think about that as a development opportunity from the point of view of city revenues and possibilities.
That's up here in the north.
Yeah,
So-
by the railroad tracks.
Yeah, like right
So I
here.
think there should be a chunk of blue up there, but I don't know exactly what shape it should be.
Yeah. I mean, all the other blues are very right angled, but we could do a more blobby one.
Well,
Just to shake things
my
up.
guess is we can be more specific up there because there are vacant parcels.
But yeah, I think all the other blues match vacant parcel
Yeah,
boundaries, so.
Right.
yeah. Okay. I'll
I
make
just
it
don't know
square.
what they are right now because I don't have that in front of me.
But that's outside the city boundary, inside the ETJ, right? Is that,
Where?
Inside the city
This,
boundary.
yeah, the stuff here up to about here is inside the city boundary.
okay,
The boundary's
we're
on
good,
the
yeah.
map, so you can
Yeah.
see where
Yeah,
it
yeah,
is.
okay.
Yeah.
No, I was just thinking, so we're only doing these blue development opportunities for things that are inside the city boundaries.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, or if there was something adjacent to the city that we could annex in
Yeah, because
immediately.
I don't think the two up, those two.
Yeah, this one might actually be outside.
I think it is.
Yeah, I think that is outside.
Okay.
And the other one next to it may be outside
Oh, yeah,
too.
yeah, that one is too.
But anyway, I agree with you. I think they should still be identified as development opportunities. We already talked about the sewer, checking the
Yeah.
sewers with Brad. And the annotations, it's too hard to pull up my own copy. The annotations for area for extended road construction connections need to be done in a different way, because there's no indication of what it means. There's one there, and there's
Yeah.
one over by, north of the tiny homes site. They're on the mobility map in a meaningful way. And so maybe they don't even have to be here because they're on the mobility map. But the way they're done here doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, there are road connections internal to those development opportunities, so it's really,
Yeah,
it's
I think it's-
misleading the way it's
I think we don't need to put
currently
it here,
displayed.
because it's on the mobility map. We need to have it from the official map protection right-of-way point of view, but the mobility map can serve that. Or the connections map, we're calling it now, right? The connectivity map.
Yeah, I think it's still labeled as mobility map, but
I
yeah.
think we ought to call it the connectivity map, because that matches back to our whatever,
That
big
matches,
ideas.
that matches what I called it. I was editing that section of the comp plan online earlier, and that's what I chose to call it.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh.
Well, it would be good, and, I mean, so right now we have these maps that are just kind of disembodied, but I imagine there being some text that kind of gives them some context.
Yeah, and that's something that's on my to-do list.
Okay, so maybe like in the text for, that is,
On page 3 or 10?
On my metrics list for this project.
we talked about there being some description of like what we want to do when we have the opportunity to transform streets and make them complete streets. What are we trying to do? What are the sort of criteria that we're trying to apply? So something that talks about goals related to connectivity could be addressed in that too. That we're meant to communicate with the mobility map plus this annotation on these development opportunities here. So when development happens, we want there to be connectivity to the surrounding context, surrounding development. And I think that's in the land development code probably to some degree. But maybe just laying that out so that, if it's not and we want to make that kind of change, then we have something in the comprehensive plan that backs up that idea.
Okay, any more comments on the development opportunities map? Slowly pulling it off the screen. Okay, so there's some cross sections. I think I have some comments for making these better, or I've marked some stuff up myself, but I'd like to. Well, first, maybe Dustin, do you want to describe sort of the task you gave to your students for this piece?
Sure. I mean, it's kind of what Lou has already said. We wanted to give a fuller description of these different street types that we have of, arterials, collectors, and residential access streets, I think is how we refer to them. So giving a sense of what the cross-section of those streets would be and how they relate to the surrounding land uses and how they incorporate a variety of modes of users for those. And then kind of knowing that, for each of these different types, the conventional classification, we have a variety of different examples of how these actually look in Urbana. And so trying to provide some examples of what minor collectors and access streets look like within the city.
So these are all sort of existing conditions. Because one of the issues I had was that the lane widths are highway level, which is probably what we have in a lot of places. But 11-foot wide lanes is pretty wide for a residential street.
Yeah, I don't think that they went to the manual of practice or anything and looked up, what our
Do they
streets-
say they're 11 feet?
Yeah.
They'd have little dimensions on them, but
Oh, okay.
that might have come as a default in the program that they were using.
That's fine, yeah.
Yeah, but that's an example of what we want to change, because these are intended to be indications of what these should be,
Yeah.
not, and.
And we might, I mean, maybe this isn't the place to have that. I mean, we have that level of detail in the land development code, the manual of practice, and we want to make sure that we're not contradicting that. So maybe these are not dimensioned per se, they just have drive lanes, parking lanes.
Yeah, but we might want to give some direction here, because I'm not sure, I don't, I probably should, but I don't go into the manual of practice to look up standards very often. But it's very likely that our manuals are, you know, still based on things that are 50 years old.
Yeah, well, it might be better to have that in, I mean, it could be better to have that in the text to describe kind of like what we would like to see happen.
Yeah.
So that, because we've had several cases come to us asking for exception or relief from right-of-way widths, right? And we've granted that for
Right.
the most part. So obviously there's a disconnect between what's in our manual of practice or land development code and what we are, you know, willing to accept to achieve other goals. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would just hesitate to tie us
Yeah.
to a specific thing in here as opposed to lay out some principles that would guide changes to the actual standards that we apply.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
Since,
so take those
yeah.
details out of the graphics, because the graphics are gonna be hard to change. And put the intentions in text that goes with these graphics. That is not only easier to change, but easier to create when somebody has to create the text.
In a previous discussion, we talked about encouraging walkability, and that involves slowing down the vehicles. I know Iowa Street very well, and it has parking on one side and then both directions of traffic. And the cars generally have to show courtesy at an open parking space for someone coming the other direction. And this seems to be just what we're looking for as a means of physically, without enforcement, slowing down the traffic. So I concur with narrower lanes, but that being done informally and by not showing the width
In the graphics.
in the,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, yeah, by being done explicitly in text to say that these are mechanisms we intend to use, and the graphics are consistent
Yep.
with that, because most people are not gonna go into these graphics with a scale and figure out how wide that lane is, which is, I thought, what you were doing. And,
I didn't use a scale. I could just eyeball it. I could tell those were 11
oh,
foot.
I got it. I shouldn't have doubted you. And one of the reasons there are 4 examples in the circles here is one of them shows parking on one side, two-way traffic, et cetera. My comment on this one is that we should make one side of the top graphic a townhouse with a narrow setback. And I think the students were gonna do this, but didn't get to it. And that to me sends 2 messages. One is mixed residential, but the other is that an access street, that a townhouse street is also an access street or a minor collector. And by having it, you know, one way and one the other way, it sort of sets up that possibility.
I think we did tell them to do that, but they got away.
Have you already given out grades?
I have, it's too late. They were trying to make sure you hired them as interns, that's all.
Okay, so then on the, sort of on the next page is actually a before and after, which, let's see.
Which one are we on? Okay.
Which they look
Makes
pretty
sense.
similar, but that's just putting a nice protected bike lane in, which is probably a good treatment for an arterial with fast-moving traffic.
Yeah, and I think with
And
this,
a
the
path.
after they were, we tried to get them to do two different things on each side of the street so that it could show different ways you could accomplish this.
Yeah,
So one side has
okay,
a
gotcha.
bike lane that is separated from the sidewalk, and then the
Yeah.
other side has a multi-use lane. Because I think we have examples of both probably on major and minor arterials.
I think probably just the multi-use lane. We might have some bike lanes on arterials, but they're not separated by,
Yeah, I mean,
they're
only
not
green.
physically separated, yeah.
But
Part of
they
Green
maybe
Street.
should be.
Right, yeah, yes.
And which graphic are we on? Because I've got trouble keeping track. We're
This
on
is the
mixed use?
second, yeah.
So one of the things I said is the buildings on the right are set back, and they shouldn't be if they're up against, like, the lower right shouldn't be if it's up against a sidewalk.
Yeah.
And on the upper one, it's not clear. I mean, it should be next to the grass. It shouldn't have a grass strip and then another sidewalk. And the thing these don't have, you need to keep the students for another 6 months. What I'm thinking is, these don't show crossings.
Right.
We don't have intersection. We need intersections and crossings, essentially plan view cross-sections. But text, we can leave some things to do with text, since we don't have the staff to do all this stuff.
All right, and the next one is the Main Street.
And the before and after here is a little strange.
Yeah,
The buildings down
Have
below moved back, makes no sense. If anything, they should be moved forward. But
yeah.
And this is, so anyway, that's one of the problems. I think otherwise it's okay. It's another example. Oh, I know. The other thing to notice is, this is labeled, this is the labeling translation that I was talking about before. So this says Main Street, which is, it's a connotation, it's not our Main Street
Right.
specifically necessarily. It's the idea of a Main Street, which is a minor arterial or a major collector. This all sort of makes some sense, but this is what we mean. And it's traffic calmed in the after, and it's still a main street, and it's still a major arterial or major collector. Or it should be minor arterial, I'm sorry, that's what it says. The collector.
Another point raised in this drawing is street lighting. And are we encouraging street lighting for walkability or discouraging it for energy saving?
I think these are good questions. My inclination is to take out the lamps
The
in
lamps.
the upper one,
Yeah.
Right,
and,
don't use this
and-
forum for the lighting discussion, right?
and that can be dealt with in text.
Right, and then I think that might be the final one. Yeah, the final one is this limited access street. So that would be your major or minor arterials.
The turn lane is
Very wide.
too wide even in, forgetting about specific turn lane widths. I noticed they've got it specified as a width, which probably exists, but I don't think a turn lane needs to be that wide. And one of the points of doing this cross-section, the trees are too small. They don't look right, and we want big trees. But we specifically put a multi-use pathway on one side as a notion that we should do that if we're gonna have a limited access, major, minor arterial. So this is Windsor Road,
Yeah.
or Curtis Road, or South Philo Road, or whatever. So the fact that we don't always do this, but actually we're doing better, right? We've got it on High Cross now, at least partway. Got it on Windsor,
Yeah.
so that's the main point of this, is to make that explicit.
I don't know if you have access to these files for changes to them, but I find it a little bit confusing that that from grade down, it looks like everything's continuous concrete. I could live with that, except that we do distinguish a green and a dark above, and it's hard, as if we're indicating material and thickness of the material.
Yeah.
So it's confusing in that way.
So,
I don't
We
know.
want to be able to land an aircraft on the multi-use path. That's all we're getting at
Eisenhower
here.
wanted.
we do have access to the files.
Yep, yeah.
But
I've
My
poked around and
inclination would
changed some
be to
stuff.
do it like the streets are done. That is,
Yeah.
otherwise it becomes too hard to read. I mean, you can't just have a little, whatever it is, 6-inch sidewalks and 12-inch streets, you won't be able to see anything.
I know, but it does look like the concrete goes all the way down and green space goes all the way down.
Yeah, so make it
Yeah.
like the black in the streets,
Yeah, yeah.
gray underneath everything, which is
Right, the gray
Just,
underneath everything can be used as just for type
annotation.
annotation.
And it's not too far off if you think it's
Too
all
far.
topsoil.
Yeah.
We can dream, right? Good black earth.
Okay, well, that wraps up sort of everything that we had thrown into the packet. I know we're had a bit of a long meeting thus far, so I don't think we're going to get into any more specific details or anything, but Andrea, I don't know if you wanted to sort of talk about what you've mostly been working on, just real quick.
Yes, we were talking about the barometers of success, and we've talked with Scott Tess, and Scott was out the first week, but got some feedback from him. Also, Tim Cowan. We talked with Tarek, our management analyst, about the census data that we really can get and what we can't get. So we'll be putting that together and getting you copies of what their suggestions were that we could use. And we also did arts and culture as well. Got some more finite information there, so. Did you want to also talk about the meeting dates? How were the future dates? What? we might anticipate the second.
Well, so it looks like we're probably not gonna have quorum on the 2nd of January, so that meeting will most likely be canceled. And we were talking about having a special meeting on the 9th, but it doesn't look like we'll have quorum there, so that special meeting idea is not there. So next time we will most likely meet will be the 16th of January, so so we have a little bit of time before we meet again, but of course with holidays and everything and people traveling and all that, we know how it goes. So, but we'll put together what we can between now and then, just to keep the ball rolling.
May I ask this, I recognize that the staff is limited in time and resources. Is the discussion that we have been conducting here that's intended to aid you, do you find that it is consistent with available time and resources, or does it go overboard?
That's a good question. I guess I will say that we are able to pick out from these discussions the best pieces and to work on those. So, I mean, we're doing what we can to address the I'd say the major things that come up here. I know Dustin mentioned interns earlier. I did reach out to our HR folks and ask them to resurrect the previous intern job description, because we had an intern at the beginning of this year. And so I think the job description would probably be pretty similar, so they're gonna get that to me, and the plan is to put out a call for, I would like to probably get in a couple of interns if possible, in the early, put that call out maybe the first couple of weeks of the new year, so we could at least get some folks in. It'd be nice to get folks that have sort of graphic skills. Be nice to get folks who maybe even already worked on some of this stuff already, but so stay tuned there. So hopefully on the 16th, on the 16th, I should have an update on where we're at with that too.
Also, in regards, the other thing we're working on too is the online version. We've got some, we've talked with the company that did this site for us, and they had some designers work with us, and so it'll have a new look, more professional. What you've got is pretty just text only, and so it'll make the online version look better as well. So, and they're doing that for us.
It should print better too.
Yeah.
So
It'll print with a cover and look more professional.
So, say more. I'm
better styling,
So
or snazzy colors.
Yeah, this has nothing to
better,
do.
better
This has
photos and
nothing to do with the
things.
organization that we've been talking about, and those changes we're making as we've gotten feedback, and so we'll have a different version for you to look at. And we checked with our vendor today to make sure that when we are putting it online, we really can track changes. We can show the changes that were made so that the Plan Commission can see what the feedback we had and how that translated to this next version. What I was referring to is just really the making it look pretty, and that's what they are working on for us. So we do have some manpower on that.
okay. I'm a little skeptical about what's being hired out. At what stage of whether there's material sufficiently organized to be paying somebody to make it look pretty.
We said nothing about paying any additional
Yeah,
costs.
no, this is our vendor that we're using. They're doing this for us. Once now that they've seen our product, they're going
But
in.
a
and-
vendor that's doing it is, a vendor is being paid. Is somebody contributing this?
But it-
I'm confused.
So the online software that we have, that's part of the software purchase. So we're utilizing the resources that we already, yes.
Yeah, so the Encode Plus software that we've been using, their team is helping us make it. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. All right. I think that wraps up our
All right.
report and discussion, so.
Anyone last thoughts on the commission? All right. With that, we
You
are
guys
adjourned.
worked
Oh,
really hard, so take some time, relax a little bit if you can.
Thank you. Well, we appreciate all the discussion and feedback because it's been really good,
really
a
has.
good collaboration. So we appreciate all of your time.
Thank
I
you.
guess we'll see you all next year.